what's your relationship to classical music? Like I know Primephonic is a classical streaming service, but do you have a special relationship to classical music, or did you sort of just fall into it?
Not really. No, I would say like at the amateur level,
Uh
because
huh.
pretty much, yeah, I think you're typical, I only knew the famous recordings, right? Or the famous works. So usually stuff that's tied to film music, that sort of stuff. And I think so. I wasn't hired by my for my classical music expertise, luckily. But then, yeah, I think once you're yeah, after you start working in a company like this, you just you end up learning quite a bit, even if you don't want to, right? And then you start also enjoying it way more. So that's yeah. So I always wanted. I think there is this kind of like a lot of people kind of share the same idea that they want to learn more, but it's quite overwhelming. And I think the more you know, then the more you're like, well, how can people actually enjoy this? There's like you actually need to study this stuff, right? So yeah, so that's my level now, I guess.
Cool. So do you have like a favorite classical composer now after the time you spent?
Not really. I think I like. I have. I'd say not necessarily a composer, but like different moods or genres.
Mm.
I think because I think we do have. Well, just couple of months ago, we also implemented this feature that we call a radio, which is precisely for the kind of beginner users, where you can just pick a couple of parameters. Like you can just say, I want happy piano music. And then it gives you a bunch of stuff. So I do find myself that it's pretty much based on the mood, right? Sometimes if you're out
Mm.
running, you want something a bit more intense. If you're having a coffee or doing some work, you want something more calm. But it's funny to see actually the effect that it has on you. I remember once one of our curators, they built this um, well, running playlist, right? And when I actually used it, I went running. I just hit play and went running. I had no idea what was in there. And the first one was like this, high pitch Tchaikovsky. So I completely burned out in the first 2 minutes running because I felt like I was invincible. And then I couldn't keep on running anymore because it put me right at that level. So it's good to see the effect that it has.
It's interesting you say that because so my dad's a music publisher, so I often have
Mm,
like conversations with him about the music industry, and it definitely feels like and you talking about like moods and like feelings
mhm.
in music is really interesting because it feels like the shift in how people consume music is like that the behavior has changed a lot. It's no longer necessarily like I have a favorite artist, and I think we still do. Like there are certain
Mhm.
artists you like to listen to, but if I just think of when I YouTube something, it's often like I don't know, like chill jazz music or like music to study to or something. It's as opposed to like looking for a specific
Yeah.
person necessarily. So I think that's an interesting behavioral change in the way we
Yeah.
engage with music. So those
Yeah.
moods you were talking about is uh, very interesting. Yeah, and then like you said, also I have kinds of music that I exercise to, or kinds of music that I read to, or kinds of music that I like. They're more synced or synchronized with activities that I do. Um,
Yeah, it's funny, right? I think it's in a way it's also a little bit sad because if I remember when I was a teenager, you would it's you didn't have access to 20,000 artists with the click of a button. So you would pick some artist that you would like, and then you would actually you'd buy their stuff, you would follow them, and you really
yeah,
created this connection. But now it's also a bit more like you say, a bit like a commodity, right? I just want chilled jazz music. I don't care who created it, who makes it. I think that's the downside of having the world's catalog available to you. Right? It just play me something. Uh,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Definitely, like for as an artist, anyways, as a composer, it's way harder because you're vulnerable to that and you fall victim to
yeah.
that very easily. Yeah, super interesting. So I have a list of questions which you couldn't prepare for. They are
Hmm.
just like quick fire questions to sort of get to know to you a bit better very quickly. I think I haven't thought of a good name for them yet, but they're essentially currently short answers, no follow-up questions.
Okay.
I don't have it's not a very catchy name yet, so don't don't judge me on the naming of it. But essentially, don't think too much. Just answer what comes to mind, and we'll just zip through them very quickly. So first one, after a really tiring day, how do you spend your evening?
Listening to music with my girlfriend and now my newborn.
Nice. And what's a really good book that you've read recently?
Recently, I'm reading one on. Well, it's actually a bit boring, but it's on technology patterns. So it tries to kind of make sense of. It tries to make sense of all of the chaos that happens in basically trying to build software. Tries to formalize it. I'm not sure how feasible it is. Maybe it's not sure I would recommend the book. A bit too corporate for a startup, but that's what I'm wrapping up.
And tea or coffee?
Coffee.
How do you take it?
Black with milk.
And what is one invention or app that you wish existed but doesn't yet?
Whoa, that's a tough one because if I knew, yeah, I would be rich right now, right? um, wow, that's you got me. Something that I wish existed. I think it's all for now. I think it's just probably something related to anything that's related to assistance. So one thing comes to mind whenever I have to buy plane tickets to travel. Right, I know that I want a plane ticket, and I'm gonna stress out for 2 days before I get that, and I'm gonna check 20 websites and prices, and I'm always gonna feel like I'm being I'm not getting the right offer or something like that. So if there was an app where I could just say I want a ticket, I want a cheap whatever, and for anything, right? That also can also be I want a haircut or I want food, whatever. Just make it happen. Of course, and have it be cheap, right? If not, I'm sure there are premium services that could do that for you. That defeats the purpose.
And what is something you're glad you said no to recently?
Something I said no to recently. Wow. Uh, this is a tough one. I actually.
Looks like you don't say no enough.
No, well, I was thinking about no. That's the thing. I mean, with at least related to work, I think we say no a lot, right? But that's basically to product development, product features.
Yeah.
So I think it's mostly around yeah, saying no to those things that you, from the technical side, maybe you know you need to do. You
Yeah.
definitely know it needs to happen, but let's just wait a few months, right? Because maybe it's not the right time.
And last question. What thing that cost you less than 50 euros has been a really good investment recently?
Well, diapers.
Yes. And if you didn't
Uh,
already realize, Henrique has a newborn. So that is why it's a good investment. They are expensive though. I don't know why
yeah,
everyone tells me they cost so much.
but the
I guess they're in
alternative
a
is also, what are you going to do?
exactly. But cool. Thanks for your answers there. Some very interesting ones. And then yeah, welcome to the podcast. It's really nice to have you here. For anyone, and I think this is just a little bit of a summary and introduction. I've obviously had the pleasure of speaking to you already, but for anyone who doesn't know, could you just give a little bit of insight into what Primephonic is all about, and maybe also some intro into sort of your role at Primephonic?
Sure, of course. Well, thanks for having me. My name is Henrique. I'm CTO of Primephonic. We're basically a music streaming company focused exclusively on classical music. So we've been around for a couple of years, actually. We first launched as a sort of a pilot, small pilot in the Netherlands, UK, and the US. That was in 2018, around September 2018. And then in the next few months, we followed with basically expanding to Europe and then expanding worldwide a few months after that. And yeah, you might maybe ask yourself, well, why is there a need for Primephonic, right? Can I not get classical music in maybe Spotify or Apple Music, to name a couple of the big ones? So what we noticed was actually the idea to build Primephonic came from seeing that I think if you we looked at the music industry, and if you go back maybe in 20 years, we saw two huge or very kind of critical moments, right? One was, I don't know how old you are, so I don't know if you know this, but if you remember Napster. Yeah, so that was in the end of the 90s. Napster came about and then basically revolutionized everything, which of course for the labels wasn't really a good move. They didn't like it, so we saw that revenues were sort of declining, right? So I think for a good 5 to 10 years, the music industry was a bit of a bit in stress mode, right? Chaotic, right? Because they were basically generating content that was being used for free. And then a few years later, maybe like a decade later, you started seeing the rise of like Spotify that actually made a viable business model for them. Right? So it was a win-win for customers and also a win for labels. So what we noticed was that right about that time, which was like 10 years ago, basically we could see a very rapid rise in music consumption in streaming. Right? You could see really people migrating from, of course, from buying CDs or buying MP3s online to streaming. But that shift or that wasn't really happening for classical music, right? Classical music is still kind of a relatively very small percentage of music consumed. It's below 5%. But we were actually seeing a little bit of a decline in classical music, right? Which makes sense because CDs were dying out, but users, our music lovers, weren't really adopting streaming. So we took a look at that, did some market research, and we found out that we basically identified a few of the pain points, and then we built a company around those pain points, right? So solutions to those pain points actually became our USPs, our unique selling points, and they were mostly focused around audio quality, so giving users actually the best possible audio quality they could get. So we offer audio in 24-bit lossless, which is as close as you can get to the master recording. And we also offer an app that's very tailored to classical music, right? And I think the biggest challenge that we saw was that even if you do have the same content in Spotify or Apple Music, just the structure of classical music, it's a lot more different than pop rock, where a CD is basically a list of songs. When you look at a CD in classical music, you may have one song that's being performed by an orchestra. So there's 20, 30 different people, maybe a multitude of different instruments, and then there's a conductor. They're performing a work from a composer from 200 years ago. So trying to squeeze that into a UI where users actually get that information, really require a dedicated app. So that's what we built. About 2 years ago, we launched, like I said, and then ever since then, we've basically been growing the catalog, trying to get to what we consider to be the most basically the most complete database of classical music works in the world, and also trying to grow the business.
That sounds like a really interesting software problem. I hadn't really thought about like how you get the structure of classical music to work with I guess the UI that we used to on streaming apps. That's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. If it's it's definitely a software problem, also a UI UX problem, right? Because I mean, you're trying to squeeze a lot of information into this tiny screen, right? I mean, even if you wanted to put everything, you would end up with multiple lines. So finding a way to get all that information to user, and also in a way that's concise and it makes sense, that was quite challenging. And we actually, to use the technology side, we actually built a system that allows us to basically test out different approaches, right? So it's very common for us to on a day, not daily, but a weekly basis, to just completely bring down our database and recreate it with new findings, right? New ways to display works and catalog IDs, and where should we put the composers, where should we put maybe the famous people in an orchestra. And then there's a lot of trial and error and a lot of user interviews as well to get it right.
What's challenging about that from a software perspective? Like, what are some of the biggest challenges you face?
So I think the biggest one that we faced, which was mostly at the beginning, was that if you look at classical music, we have works from maybe or recordings of works from composers from the medieval period. Also, that you're talking about 1500 years ago. So when you look at classical music and you actually you open it up, there's a lot of different periods in there, and then it's very hard to just get the information, get the content, right? It's unfortunately you cannot just go to Wikipedia and say, well, let me get all of the works from Mozart, from Beethoven, from Tchaikovsky, maybe from those, yes, because they're quite popular. But when you start going through the long tail of composers that are maybe not as famous, it really becomes a very intensive job to compile that, right? So first of all, gathering that data has been it's something that a lot of time, effort, and resource has been put into building this up, and it's still something that we do. It's a never-ending job. And then the second one, which is where technology comes in. Yeah, how do you make sure that data remains consistent, right? Because we're building our classical music database, but also on a weekly basis, we're also ingesting new albums from labels, and then the new content that we get from the labels, it's not necessarily as clean as the database that we're creating. So, matching the two data sets, that's something that I'd say a huge chunk of our development effort is put into making sure that we correctly match those, right? And why do we do that? And that's basically to give a complete offering to our users, right? That means the end result is that they can look at they can listen to an album that was released maybe a week ago. They can listen to one song and they know precisely what they're listening for, right? They know it's maybe they're listening from a work from Beethoven, but they can also see maybe 300 or 400 different recordings of those works from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe using a piano, using a violin. So that's really what powers, I think, what we call the classical wow, and that's purely technology. It's also something that just cannot be scaled with humans, right?
Right.
I think we have, I think at the moment we have just over 4 million songs, so trying to manually match those would be impossible, basically.
Yeah, you probably have to work Saturdays and Sundays.
Yeah. And nights and
And nights.
yeah.
How cool is that though? Like that you're basically immortalizing music from like 500 years ago with technology today. I wonder what Mozart would say if if he would see this. He'd be like, "Wow, this is so cool."
Yeah, and I think it's also it's a little bit of we call it like I'd say a moral kind of a calling, we'd say, because when we noticed that classical music was dying, we also said, well, we either do something about it or it's gonna die out, right? If people are eventually just gonna stop listening to it if it's not in streaming, and also I think one second factor is we also have a unique payout model to artists, right? So just for example, it's usually on your mainstream streaming services. Artists are paid by the number of times a song gets streamed, which makes sense. But when you translate that to classical music, there's actually quite a lot of recordings that are 10, 20 minutes. So then if you compare a classical music artist, the number of times that their works, that the recording gets streamed in its entirety versus maybe a 3 minute song by Drake, then it's quite unbalanced, right? So we also figured, what's the incentive for artists to sort of basically they have no incentive to keep this art form pure, right? They need to compromise, and they need to start, if they actually want to make a living out of this, they really do need to make songs that fit within the quick consumption, 2-3 minutes. So by switching that, and also in applying a payout model, we actually pay artists per second stream. We also ensure that they get paid fairly, and they also have an incentive to not to compromise the art form.
Cool. And then just quickly, how would you describe the sort of like your day-to-day role as a CTO?
Sure. So I think being part of a startup, it changes quite a bit. I say maybe every couple of months there's new priorities come, which also require the role to change. Right. If I look back on, for example, my first, maybe 2019. Most of 2019 was spent on putting together a tech team. I was actually the first true technical hire at the moment, and that was my first task. So 2019 was actually just 80% of my time was spent on recruitment, hiring, and also got just building what I call the tech foundations, right? So I think that at that time was mostly focused around uh, the current necessities that we had. So it doesn't matter what size of company you are always going to have this infinite backlog. You're always going to have not enough people, not enough time to build it. So putting together a tech team while also delivering, that was probably what most of my time was being spent on. And also, I think back then we were also working with a dev agency. So we had this transition of basically for about 6 months of building up our tech team while also gradually just reducing our dependency with the dev agency. That required a little bit of a even though the dev agency was here in the Netherlands, so it made things easier. We could go to their offices. We actually have a very, very strong relationship, but you're still sort of managing two different teams with two different ways of working, two different cultures. And then I think after that, then it changed based on the roles, right? So I think right now, most of my time right now is also time to build up the foundations of much bigger products, right? So I think if you look at the product now, it is at the level where we feel like it's no longer an MVP. It has feature parity with the big ones, with Apple Music, with Spotify. So we've built that up. Now we're really focusing on features that are really core to classical, right? So building like recommendation systems. So those also require additional hires in the team, new skill sets, bringing in data scientists, data engineers. So that's in a way, it's kind of also managing, the sort of natural split that's happening within the team. It's no longer a team where everybody knows what everybody's involved in. You start also having kind of separate kind of sub departments in the team, right? So that's currently what I'm doing. And then 2 months from now, it's probably going to be something different.
as it is with startups, as you said, you sort of you mold like Play-Doh into whatever role you need to at the time. But you've alluded to some of the like things that I was really hoping to dive into in this conversation. And I think, as you said, you went through this process of having used a dev agency in the beginning and then transitioning to actually using a like building your own in-house dev team. But what I think is really interesting is you didn't only have to build that dev team from scratch, you had to build it from scratch while transitioning from using an agency and while your business was already operational. You weren't like starting a company, you were trying to run a company and build this in-house dev team, which I think is a really unique sort of context. But before we dive into what the experience was like, I'm curious to know, like, why the decision to use an agency first? Like, what was the decision to use an agency as opposed to an in-house dev team?
Sure. So I think the decision to go with an agency, that was actually before I joined, but it was mostly, I think, back then the company was about maybe 10, 15 people, and it was mostly business type people and or music related, right? So I say there wasn't really a strong kind of technical or product skill set within the company, and it basically was a matter of time, right? We wanted to kind of build quickly a product that would at least test the hypothesis. So we had a very extensive market research that proved that maybe there's a market. Everything seems to indicate that there's a market opening for this type of business. So we also wanted to test it out, right? So basically, there were two options. You either build a tech team from scratch, which is it's costly, it's time consuming. So the time to market was basically too much. So then that was kind of an easy decision. Let's go with an agency. And then also the type of agency that Primephonic decided to choose was also very important, right? I think there's a lot of horror stories about dev agencies that don't deliver what you expect, and that definitely wasn't our case. We chose for a company, a local company, which was an important factor because we wanted to have that close connection, and also a company that was very much specialized in building MVPs. Right, so they have a lot of basically experience and a lot of their track record of really being kind of that. Um, Coming in as that sort of almost like a technical co-founder, right? So they're
Yeah.
not just building the product, but they're also, they're providing the product owner role, they're providing the scrum master, they're providing kind of the technical advisor role of do this, don't do that, which was also quite useful to make sure that you're building something that um, if the MVP turns out that it works, that you also can continue development with that product, and you're not
Right.
forced to just throw it away and start from scratch.
And what changed that made you want your in-house, your own dev team? Like, was there a specific event or moment that triggered that shift?
Yeah, so I think it was mostly after the launch, right? So there was always the idea, of course, we want to have our own in-house team, but the moment you launched and you start seeing, yeah, basically you start seeing downloads going up, number of subscribers going up. We're getting picked up also we were getting picked up by pretty famous publications like Forbes, New York Times, Financial Times. So when we got that also market validation that there's a business here. Then that also put a lot of pressure to bring product development into the team, right? So I think maybe for during the MVP stage, it's relatively easy to kind of to describe what you want from a product, right? There's, of course, you have your core, what makes you, which in our case was basically the classical music content, and the product features. Some product features highlight that, but there's also quite a lot of just what I call satellite projects that need to happen within an app, right? So there's very little debate. Nobody's going to debate if you need a login screen or you need a player or you need a profile or search, right? So that means product development is also, it's very easy to communicate that to an agency, and the dev agency, they also have quite a bit of autonomy to implement that. But after the launch, then it really, you start also having uh, is the risk of the features that you build are higher because you always you have a you always you almost like you have to deliver to your clients, right? So also a lot more thought goes into product development, and there's the risk of basically you screwing up with a feature, right? So that means also the autonomy factor of the dev agency, it decreases, right? It means you really need somebody there to kind of make those micro decisions that happen on a daily basis, right? And those micro decisions, we notice that more and more often they're not just tech based or product based, they're really tied to the core of what makes your product unique, right? So it's really about, there's this edge case of classical music. Do we go for option A or option B? The dev agency, they can make those calls, but ultimately those are also business decisions. So when we noticed those types of decisions coming up more and more often, then it also became more clear that we need not just tech and product decisions, but those decisions, they need to have a classical music component, right? We need to have basically bring the two worlds of the musicologists at Primephonic and the tech people. It needs to come together. So that's, I'd say that was the moment where things really, or the need really became apparent.
So just to make sure I'm understanding, it's almost like that there's a certain level of separation from the agency. That's still absolutely fine when you're building an MVP, but at some point that separation becomes too far. Where, as you said, the minute you start having more like micro challenges and decisions that have bigger business impacts,
Yeah.
you need to start bringing those, as you said, home and have them in house, so that you can, I guess, work more. It would almost be like with a long term site, I
Mhm.
guess, would be
Yeah,
the
yeah.
thing there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in our case that was definitely how it played out. I think in the first stages it's also very easy to communicate. Um, Basically, you work out your what is the initial offering of your product, right? So you can work with prototypes, you can work with sketches, and then it's mostly for the tech team to kind of just go on autopilot and implement it. And then we come in, maybe a couple of months later to just check on the progress and make small tweaks, right? But once you launch, then you also go into a much more steady rhythm of product development. And that, we noticed that we were spending actually more time with the dev agency, right? And we were actually, it wasn't just myself as a CTO or maybe product owner, but also the the roles that needed to be involved in product development were also people from catalog, people with really the heavy music knowledge. And that's when you really said, well, you need to bridge. If you really want to build this long-term product, those micro decisions, of course, the tech team can make them, but you need the input from everybody in the team to make sure that those micro decisions don't come back and bite you in the ass. 3-6 months from now, and then it's impossible to revert.
Yeah. How does an in-house dev team solve some of those challenges? What are some of the things you can do?
Sure. So I think the proximity factor is huge, right? Which is a bit weird now that we have everybody's working from home in Corona, but just having everybody physically together, that really helped. That you can just walk, 10 seconds, talk to somebody, and just have that question answered. That was really useful, especially because we're a company of about 40 people, and I'd say at least 70%, 75% of the company, they are active users of the product, right? So they are their ideas and their opinions, they come with a lot of weight as well, right? It's not just somebody that's uh, just trying the app now and then. They're
Right.
actually using it, 8 hours a day. So when we need their input, for a developer to be able to walk up to somebody and say, I'm thinking about improving. For example, I'm thinking about improving our recommendations engine by adding more variety in terms of, for example, I think a recommendation should have not just the popular recordings of a composer, but also the least popular ones, right? Maybe it makes sense from a product, from a statistical point of view or a tech, but maybe having somebody who has that knowledge from classical music tell you, yes, but be careful because this, and that, or
Right.
maybe create a separate playlist for that. I think that value is very hard to get when you don't have the relationship, right?
Right.
And I think also bring the two teams together. It helps bridge this gap that you're always going to have this gap of tech is the factory, right? They make things, they produce things, and it's not so much like that, right? I think the developers also bring in quite a lot of experience, from the mobile side, from basically product development, right? What works, what doesn't work. So it's also making sure that the conversations are happen both ways, right? I think that's invaluable. That sometimes in a dev agency, it's very hard to get to that point because you always see them as the people that just execute on this, just make it happen, which is not the best way to build a company around.
Right. So there's the physical proximity, but also I guess the emotional proximity between team members, but also your team to the actual product itself,
Yeah.
which I assume makes the solutions people can actually think more like tuned into or dialed into the product because they're thinking about it every day. They can come up with these ideas and say, actually, what about this? Which is maybe something that you lose, as you said, when you don't have that relationship.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think everybody needs to see just from a team, also culture building perspective. You need to know that everybody's in here sort of for the long run, right? So it's very nice to see also kind of the two we used to have very two strong cultures, right? There was a very clear, like there's the tech culture and then there's the classical music culture. But then the moment you realize that there's so much knowledge to share between the two, right? And also being humble to say, well, I'm good at tech, but I have no idea how the music industry works, right? Then you start having kind of these sessions where we basically share, and then it becomes much more of it's easier to build a business when everybody's on the same page, and you don't have these You don't have the tech silo, the marketing silo, the content silo. So much like present.
Cool. Yes. I mean, like, as you said, you moved from just needing an MVP to actually having to think about the business impact of decisions, and that was like sort of the trigger for you, where you moved into, cool, now we need to build or put together our in-house dev team. But what were some of the biggest challenges for you in your particular context with putting that together?
Mhm.
Yeah, could you just talk me through some of the things you encountered as challenges in that?
Sure. So I think the biggest one is when we started out with the hiring process. Hiring is basically it's like a sales position as well, right? You're selling the company, you're selling the position. Of course, there's a negotiation round that happens, but I'd say for most part, when you get to that point, the decision has usually already being made by the candidate and the company, right? So the challenge is basically well, how do you sell a culture that doesn't exist, right? And it's I think when it comes to culture, it's also very very tough because you can never really plan for a culture, right? Of course, yes, you can try to write it down and you can envision what you'd love your team to become. Uh, but it's not something that people are actively working on a daily basis. So, okay, this is what we do, right? It's usually culture comes usually as sort of a looking back, something that you look back, okay, this is our culture, and then you put it on paper. So trying to hire good developers, good talent from actually from around the world can be quite challenging, right? So you're selling actually you need to find a way to sell the company in a way that there's that it's exciting, right? It's not so much it's not so much, well, come join us and you're going to work 3 months with a dev agency, but more of the opportunity, right? You're one of the early hires, and it's completely it's true, right? Those things are true, right? By being one of the early hires, I think the impact that you have on shaping the culture and also shaping the product, it's tremendous, right? It's always like yeah, you immediately see what you do, right? There's no, if things go south, uh, it's within your power to solve those, right? So the good things, the bad things. So we're also looking for people that could see this as really an opportunity and not as a negative, right? That you would be kind of you're the only, for example, you're the only guy that's going to build the iOS app, or the only guy that's going to build Android app. So we're looking for certain profiles that can really rise to the occasion, right? So I'd say definitely the how you pitch your company to potential candidates um, uh, changes quite a bit, and also being very upfront about how the initial couple of months are going to look like, right? You don't want to. The worst thing is for you to sell something and then on the first day they find out that it's a completely different scenario. So we try to always be very open. Like this is the short term, the medium term, and long term of what you're going to expect, right? The short term means that you're going to spend probably 4 days a week working with the tech guys at the agency. uh, I think that was basically the most challenging aspect, and not everybody's up for it. We also had some candidates that were like, yeah, I like the company, but not really sure this works for me. It's completely normal also not to pursue those paths.
Yeah. So I mean, I think some of the things you said, like, being upfront and sort of using that to say, like, cool, there may not be a culture, but that means there's a lot of sandbox for you to play around in and really help us build a culture.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what go for it.
No, I say, yeah, not to, when I say there isn't a culture, I mean, there isn't a tech culture, right? There's
Right.
definitely a company culture, right? Because of course, we were already at that point, we were probably about 20, 25 people, but there's definitely a culture. But of course, if you're looking to hire, 10, 15 people and bring them into a team of 25 people, yeah, the culture is going to change, right? It's going to change drastically. Yeah.
So I mean, I think that's a cool a cool challenge which I think you mentioned the last time we spoke as well. So maybe we can just touch on that. Like,
Mhm.
how do you how do you welcome a new culture? Because as you said, it's you can say right off the bat, look, we're hiring, almost a third of the company will be new hires. Our culture is very likely to change. What are some of the ways that you approach that as an existing company, so that you actually are more open to that and it's easier to blend? Do you have any lessons from having gone through that?
Mhm. So I think I think in our case, we knew that, well, even though there were new hires, all of the new hires would be going through an onboarding process with the dev agencies, right? So we also accepted that, well, the culture of the dev agency would sort of be incorporated by our developers as well, right? And I'd say for that was that was good and bad, because so we actually quite liked the culture of our dev agency. They're very, very tech oriented, very senior guys, very driven, very focused. But we also, we wanted to make a few tweaks here and there.
Yeah.
So I think in our case, we we tried to mix both, right? So both cultures. So we try to have a healthy balance of, and that's basically, number of hours spent with the dev agency and with the Primephonic team, right? So making sure that, yes, they were involved, they had proper time to do the onboarding of all of the platforms, all of the systems, and they got that technical expertise handover from the dev agency, but that they also spend quality time with the team, right? And that means, going for, being present in the, like the sessions that we had, basically the kind of the presentations that we had on music industry, that they were also getting that part of the company side, being present in, company outings, having drinks with everybody, to avoid kind of this moment where we stop having dev agency, and then suddenly 10 people come into the team, right? So that was one of the things that we did, and also, just keeping up with also the normal touch points, right? The demos, making sure that everybody came together as a company. It's mostly about FaceTime of everybody. I think that was the most critical one, I say, for the culture. And then once we actually once we actually completely phased out of the dev agency, we also took a time to, well, have a company outing, or just a tech team outing, to really have an open discussion of, well, we're on our own right now. What kind of tech culture do we want to build, right? And then I think what's really valuable, it just start with a very clean sheet. Even if of course, as a CTO, I had my ideas of things that I would like to implement, or how I would like to shape things. But I think also giving the team the opportunity to shape it themselves was quite valuable. Right? And I'm talking about everything from even from the very basic decisions of, what kind of what kind of a ticket tracking system do we want to use, right? This is how we used to do things with the dev agency. Do we want to continue to do so, or do we want to change? And I think we experimented quite a bit with the processes, with the sprints, how long they were, even, starting sprints in a Wednesday, just because we said, well, why not? Somebody read a blog post that it might be a good idea. So I think being also very flexible towards the team, and also in a way it's also acknowledging and thanking them for their effort, right? Of being, 2 or 3 months, you guys really didn't have a lot of say, but now, it's up for us to decide. And it was actually, I think, I remember we had quite some interesting conversations where, we were all debating, and sometimes people would look to me to make a decision, and I was just say, well, don't look at me, right? We decide, right? If this is this is the kind of process we want to build, who am I to say we're not going to build it, right? Let's build it, and then 2 months from now, if it doesn't work, we change it. So I think that also helped in a way. You're maybe not even realizing it, but you are shaping the culture, right? This culture of the team is actually the team is responsible for everything, and I think that was a really significant um, process to go through. because we had a little bit of a moment where when we phased out of the dev agency, these were the dev guys from the agency. They were really senior guys. They were really experienced, people with 15, 20 years of experience. So when suddenly you cut off that relationship, it's also a bit of a shock for the team to
sure.
doubt themselves and say, "Oh, are we really ready for this?" Right? There's still parts of the systems that I didn't really look at. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I hope things don't break. But I think, of course, things break. We had moments where really things, we had like outages, complete outages of the system, and you have this urge to, like, let's call it the tech guys, and it's like, no, we go into the same rooms, like, no, we're not going to call them, and just be okay with it, and also make sure that the rest of the company is okay with that we're going to be out for a couple of hours until we figure out what's going on. But having also that, having the company backing of saying it's fine to fail, let's fail. Let's not call the guys for rescue. That's going to get us really to that next level of really taking ownership of this product.
Right. I just want to highlight something you said as well, because I think you made quite a good point there. That in this idea of letting your team shape its own tech culture from the ground up, I think there's you were saying when they look to you for like to make a decision, because I think as a leader, you often you fall into that thinking of I'm expected to like help my team get through this, but sometimes taking just pausing for a little bit moment longer and actually taking a step back and saying let's make a decision together as a team. You sort of encourage people to not rely on your role as much, and through that you end up building quite a cool culture. And as you said, it may not feel like it immediately, but you are actually influencing the way people are thinking about your team culture. So I think that's a cool little tip that someone
Yeah,
can take away.
yeah, absolutely. I think there's maybe different styles of management or leadership, right? But I think also, to if you think that you can, if you need to hire people that are smarter than you, right? Especially if you look at the current team structure, we have iOS developers, Android developers, DevOps, QA engineers, data scientists, data engineers, backend developers. To assume that one person actually knows more than each individual, that's a very bad assumption, right? So of course, I think as a technology leader, you're ultimately you're responsible for every decision, right? For especially the bad decisions. So of course, you need to do your job. You need to really question. But I think most of that questioning needs to come from sort of like basically a curiosity side, right? And then also bringing in in my case, about 15 years of experience, just having lived through good decisions, bad decisions, seeing things fail. I think that's the way I see it. That's kind of the role that a CTO should play, right? It's not really, let's pick technology A versus B. I do my best to make that clear to my team that you were hired for a reason. You're also the one responsible for making those decisions, right? Of course, you need to do your work. You need to do your diligence. You need to uh, you know you need to have basically your sales pitch ready. When I ask why are we picking this and not that, but ultimately it's also the team decision, right? If not, then if it's this top-down thing where we say, well, we're going to implement this programming language or this provider, then it's very hard to get that ownership that you want in a team, right? Then it becomes really kind of this boring, I'm just going to do it because I've been told to do it, which is definitely not the culture, definitely not the right mindset for a startup, right? Because if I think in a startup, there's no there's no hiding, right? If you don't do your job, you notice it, right? You notice it in the product, you notice it in the delivery times. So we really want to build a team where people feel that sense of ownership, but also sense of urgency, right? Like, well, if I don't do this, then the company goes under, right? The people are customers are relying, the rest of the company are relying on us. So I think that's really an important factor when you shape the tech team.
And why was that so important for you? Like, why was getting your devs to feel a sense of ownership important for where Primephonic was at
Mhm.
that point?
Sure, that's a good question. I think no, I come from a very technical background as well. So I've also worked maybe about 10 years as a developer. Um, so I understand the value of really treating developers with the domain knowledge that they have, and not just as kind of uh, the 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 executors, right, of maybe some other departments' requests or even tech requests. So I really like to treat engineers uh, with the right level of expertise that they have, right? So I think, and that's also reflected in the hiring process, right? I think the hiring process, but also evaluation process, the 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 skill set factor that we look for people that join Primephonic, it's probably only about 25-30% of what we look for, right? I mean, we've hired people that actually have a completely different tech stack than what we use. We've hired people that don't know any technologies that we use, but they check all of their boxes, right? So I think for me, it's important that you, as an engineer, that of course you know your skill sets, but also you're flexible in pretty much flexible in that, and you see your skill set as a tool. It's just the current tools that you use to solve problems, right? Those are not the tools that you might use a year from now, 2 years from now. So we're really looking for people that can execute on very vague terms, because I think most of the feature development comes from uncertainty, right? There's a lot of unknowns in the startup. So we want people that can really see those challenges and bring in that engineering level. And I think the only way to make good use of those skills is really to be very upfront about what you expect from the engineers, right? It's not uh, it's not about make. Of course, you need to make deadlines, and of course, you need uh, to deliver. But I also have a lot of discussions with the team, right? But they ask me, "Oh, when do you have? There's this big feature, right?" And then they say, "When do you have it? When do we need it to be done?" And I turn it back on them as well. You tell me, right? You're the expert. I mean, we can play this game where I come up with a very unrealistic date, right? I just make up that it needs to be done in 10 days, and then you tell me it's not doable. Or, you actually, this take a couple of hours, think about it, do some research, and you tell me, you know what, it's 3 weeks. And that's fine, right? If it comes from, if you're able to give estimations based on actual content, and I think those decisions carry a lot more weight in the team. Um, and I think also for career growth, it's those are skills that it's much nicer to have. Uh, so at least that's what we try to do. Of course, we still make mistakes. Of course, things don't work out as we expected. I think that's also the nice way of working with startup. I'd say by definition, we're always maybe 2 or 3 months behind where we should be in a startup, right? We're always playing catch up with processes, but that's also at least for me, the cool thing.
Yeah. And I wanted to jump back to some things you were talking about. If things broke because you were moving, when you made that move finally from the away from the agency, that things would break and you'd have to figure it out. But um, I think I remember you telling me that you had quite a cool approach and setup for making that onboarding and offboarding as smooth as possible. Could you just tell me a bit more about how you onboarded a dev team and offboarded the agency, and how
Mhm.
how that collaboration looked?
Sure. So I think in our case, one thing which really helped was actually having a very open discussion with the dev agency, right? I think we consider them our friends. They come to the office. There is a relationship there. But at the end of the day, if you look at it from a purely business perspective, they are losing a client, right? Or they're being replaced. So there is this negative factor as well that just needs to be discussed, right? I think there's no way, there's no need to kind of hide it, or hide the fact that you're hiring. So being very upfront with them that, hey, we want to build our dev team. it's something it is happening. This is how we foresee it happening. So coming up with actually having a plan and sharing that plan with them, and also asking them to be involved, right? They could be involved in the hiring process. They can be involved also in coming up with the assignments that we hand out to candidates. Because at the end of the day, until you build your own tech team, they are the ones that have the technical expertise of your product, right? So you need their cooperation. So I think that's something that really helped, right? So we came up with this actual, basically a plan of how long we want this process to last, and some milestones, and just discuss it with them. And at the end of the day, the conversations were basically by which date do we want the team size to shrink, right? That also turned out to have some nice or interesting situations where suddenly you go into your dev agency and you see more Primephonic people than dev developers. So you also feel a bit like, man, it's a little bit of a weird situation here. Also during lunch, you see a lot of Primephonic people. But I think just being open about it, and also one thing which really helped was, even though it's you can never really know when you're going to hire somebody, the exact date, especially when you hire people from abroad, and there's visa processes and stuff. Either way, you need to have those as hard deadlines, because you need to communicate to the agency, and you also need to communicate internally to management team, that there is a very clear cutoff point where it doesn't matter what happened, we're going to be on our own. And also for the tech team, that's useful. If not, then you run the risk of just having this never-ending process where you always feel like, well, we need more time with the agency. So we were we're very strict about, each developer gets at most 2 months to work with the dev agencies, and they completely migrate towards Primephonic, right? So communicating that to developers as well, and saying, well, make sure you know everything that you need to know, ask all of the questions. I think that was looking back, a very important factor, because definitely you're never going to reach that point where you say, well, I'm 100% confident that now we can now stand on our own.
So obviously you have like the final end date, the goal end date or the goal deadline for this process. But what were some of the like milestones or checkpoints that you had along the way? I'm just curious, if someone's struggling with this and struggling to think about what sort of checkpoints to have, because like you said, saying we'll have everyone hired by this date is really scary, because you don't know, like, well, the visas, like, are they currently in a job that they need to still resign from, blah blah blah. So there's like all these things to consider. But what were some of those those, I guess, those checkpoints that you had for as deadlines?
Yeah, so I think in our case, the checkpoints were mostly focused on the risk factor. So for example, there were certain roles in the team where it was very clear, if you basically label it as must-haves, nice-to-haves. So there were some roles that we figured, if it's a late hire or we hired this after the transition is done, it's not that bad, right? But there were some roles that were really highly critical, right? And those roles were mainly due to or related to uh, the the complex systems. So there's a couple of systems which are really complex to understand. So we made sure that first of all, we prioritized those hires before any of the others, because they needed that kind of onboarding process. And then the other checkpoint or milestone, which was really important, was, well, it's not enough to just ask them to be present in the dev agency, right? Now, what I mean by this is that the dev agency, those guys were also, they had been working with Primephonic for over a year, so they had a lot of knowledge of the product, and they were also uh, they were able to self-manage themselves, right? So it's whenever a new feature, let's a scenario where we had a new dev coming in their first week, a feature would be pushed into the current sprint. those developers, from the agency, they would have a tendency to keep on working in their siloed way, right? Which is something that you don't want, right? So of course they have the knowledge, they can work faster. So having those checkpoints in place where you in a way force the onboarding process to happen, and you need to be okay from the product development side that, well, yes, maybe the feature is going to take twice as long because it's not one dedicated person working on this, but there's actually pair programming, and they're going through the teaching and learning process. That was also very important. That's something that we noticed, uh, that we had to actively kind of make sure that it happened, right? And it was very tough actually, right? Because you basically have this option of, well, we can have this feature shipped in a week. Let's aim for that, or you can have it shipped in 2-3 weeks if you want to do the onboarding. But that's something that it needs to happen, right? You don't want, or you should really try to avoid when you have a very fixed onboarding process. You want to avoid that you have your new developers working only on bug fixes, only on the minor tickets. You really want to push them on bigger tickets that really force them to learn, the whole platform.
And how did you divide the week? Because I know you said you had like X amount of time at the dev agency doing like onboarding, offboarding, and X amount of time in the office. How was that? How was that split?
And so the week was mainly, it also depended on the role, but I'd say for the at least first month, it was usually 4 days spent with the agency and one day spent with Primephonic. And the day with Primephonic was usually Friday, because we had at the end of every Friday we had office drinks, and also people playing the piano, people bringing in their own instruments. So that was also tied to the culture, right? We wanted to make sure that the team was present for those events as well. And then throughout the week, it was usually, most of the guys would spend time at the agency, and what you would see was that usually, after a month or so, the developers would actually be the ones to say, well, I don't actually need to be there. They would also build up their confidence, so they would on their own kind of reduce the time that they would spend with the agency.
Yeah, I mean that touches on something you said last time we spoke as well, which I thought was really cool, is that you let knowledge sharing become the priority there, and developers guide you on how well, because like you said, if they're the expert, you can trust that they can guide you
Yeah,
on how well or how far in the process they are of being onboarded. And if a month is all they need, that's cool.
that's
Then,
perfect.
but
Yeah,
but they'll tell you about that,
yeah,
which I think is another cool way of approaching this, because yeah, it also, as you said, that builds a bit more ownership because you actually give them the opportunity to have that confidence, which is quite
yeah,
cool.
absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you would say was a particular challenge for you? We've sort of spoken about selling a team culture or a tech culture that wasn't there, the kind of impacts it has on a culture,
Mhm.
as well as the challenges in onboarding and offboarding at the same
Yeah.
time.
Um, Not really. I think the only thing that comes to mind is, I think we talked a lot about the tech impact, right? But I think you also need to take into account the company impact, right? Because I think we briefly touched upon, you're bringing 10, 15 people to a team of 20, 25. Um, so that also has an impact, right? You are changing the culture of the company, right? So being aware of that as well. And I think what we did was also, that's to sort of at least be aware of that. We also made sure that during the interview process, it wasn't purely tech, right? We sometimes we also try to make these people, the new candidates, either have lunch with the company, because we still have, as a team, we have lunch all together. It kind of strategically place that person far from tech people, but more with music people. But also being aware that you also need to have sort of the the approval from the rest of the company that this is somebody that also fits in with the current culture, right? So I think that's highly important as well, right? Because I think that you also don't want to completely shape the company culture to something uh, that's purely tech, right? There's a lot of value in also having that business part, that music part. Um, And the way we did it is, like I said, make sure that the non-tech people are also made part of the recruiting process.
Right, and I think it's worth mentioning that you were in a good position where your team wasn't like 1,000 people yet, where you could actually have that interaction. Like it really helped that you had a team of 25, where it was easy to get that sort of engagement,
Yeah.
which is cool. But like, what has been, just as a sort of closing question, what has been the biggest lesson for you in this process of moving from an agency to a dev team? Like, what is a standout experience there or lesson?
Sure. So I think what comes to mind right now is nobody really knows how to do it, right? I think that's number one, actually, and then that may seem like maybe sort of a very dumb tip, but embracing that, I think, really helps you. It it helps you establish the right mindset, right? And what I mean by this is, when I joined also 2 years ago, I was also very fresh to this job, right? I had never built a team of from 10 people in 6 months, right? I have never migrated from an agency, and I think even back then, to make things, we didn't discuss it, but we had the agency. We also had a couple of developers from Ukraine working with us, so it was a little bit of a mess in terms of people. Um, so it was also just embracing that, nobody really knows how to do it. So it's very likely that whatever you come up with, it's it's an improvement, right? And I still remember having a conversation with probably my first month or so with my CEO, and he's telling, well, can we? You've been here a month. Can we start putting together the tech team? Yes, we can. Well, that's what do you need to? Can you come up with an offboarding plan? I said, yes, leave it to me. And then you Google, right, offboarding plan, and you
Right.
find nothing, right? It's like, wow, okay, what do I do now, right? What is an offboarding plan? I think the fact that you cannot even find it in Google, that's already kind of indication that, and just accepting that also, well, maybe you were hired to do this because they also have no idea how to do this, right? So embracing the that, I think that goes a long way, and also just have fun. I'd say also something. Don't be so critical. No, it's very easy to make an Excel sheet with your plans, and but you're at the end of the day you're dealing with people, right? So it's very easy to make a column where on month one you have 10 people, then 9, then 8, then 7. But reality doesn't work like that, right? You're actually, when you're getting when you're building your team and phasing out a team, you're bringing people and letting go of people. So having being aware of that human factor as well. I think that's also important, right? It's not just numbers in an Excel, and it's very rare that things will work out like you plan. Right? So be open to things not working out, or maybe you have your plan, then you share it with an agency, and the agency says, "Yeah, well, it turns out that they also have their commitments. So you expect to have this guy for 6 months, but he's actually booked for another project. So you can only have him for 3 months, and this is a replacement, but you never considered a replacement. So being open to things really not working out the way you expected, and don't make too much of it. You're still going to make things work regardless.
Yeah. I read a book. I wish I could remember which one it was now, but it painted an interesting picture based on what you were just saying as well. It's like if something goes wrong, the only thing that went wrong was your expectation. Because if you expected that thing, then it would have been exactly what you expected. So the only difference is what you expected didn't happen. The reality would have been the same had you just expected a slightly different outcome. So it's totally, I
Yeah.
totally buy that. Just be open to that.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. I
Yeah,
think sometimes there's just too much pressure to do the right thing,
yeah,
but nobody really knows, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And then yeah, I mean, where can people find you online or follow you online?
Sure. Oh, that's a tough one. I don't tweet, so not Twitter. I guess they can just, if they search for my name and last name on LinkedIn. Yeah, anybody can feel free to reach out with uh, comments, questions, remarks. We
Awesome.
also have we do have a Primephonic engineering blog as well.
Cool.
where we talk about things that are related to data engineering. That's on Medium, so if people just also search for Primephonic Engineering, they should be able to find it in there.
Fantastic. And then your app is available on all the stores, right?
Indeed, yeah. Primephonic.com. That's Prime and then Phonic. It's a little bit of a hard name, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool. No, fantastic. Thanks so much for your time and sharing what was a very new process to me in any case. I learned a lot, and yeah, I mean, it would be cool to have you back. I think, as you said, the nature of startup means that we could be having a completely different conversation in 2 months. So I'm looking forward to that. That would be cool.
Yeah. Thanks for having me again. Really nice sharing my stories.